So, I rejoice in this building. It thrills me. It's deliberate exoticism, its unity, its flamboyance, its uniqueness. But there's no doubt whatsoever that at the time of its creation, I would have been appalled. Okay, discuss. How do we reconcile these ideas within ourselves? How is it okay for us to respond thus just because it's a long time ago? Is it the same as, you know the phrase, oh, too soon, with jokes about horrifying things? Is it okay for us to wait a certain amount of time in aesthetic terms, just as it is in moral terms, in inverted commas, and the fog has cleared, and we can look at things anew? It's something that confuses and wrenches me a little bit.
You were sort of drawing attention to the black and white fakery earlier, weren't you?
Yeah.
It's kind of like where the day began, going through the black and white villages and talking about is it okay to fake that kind of architecture?
Well, is it even okay to preserve it? Because it's like they're like pandas, aren't they? Their feeding cycles, their reproductive cycles aren't congruent with those of the modern world, shall we say, and they should be extinct. Those black and white buildings are not really fit for purpose in our world, are they? Preservation, reconstruction.
There is a bit of, without going too far off track, but there is a bit of a movement at the moment, isn't there, to not knock any buildings down as long as they're structurally sound and refit them and repurpose them. So any old ugly building in Birmingham or Wolverhampton should, in theory, never be knocked down.
Right.
It should be repurposed from something to flats, etc. So that's kind of a conservation or a resources argument.
Yeah, I mean, this is an argument that spirals off in so many directions, isn't it? Because there you could go down an alleyway of, well, doesn't matter, because if you take the historic fixtures and fittings out of a building, you may as well have knocked it down in terms of pubs, in terms of churches.
But should we preserve buildings for the sake of preserving something from the past?
Well, you see, for
me, I think so.
For me, yes. But I'm not sure if I can entirely quantify or justify it in certain cases. Obviously, I'm thinking about the Crooked House, okay? Obviously, those black and white villages today are beautiful in themselves and worth visiting, but at the moment, they are acting as a metaphor as well for me. Because we don't know what's going to be built in the place of the Crooked House. There are discussions about rebuilding it brick by brick, just like they have rebuilt things like the walls of St Malo. And now...
Warsaw was completely rebuilt, the centre of Warsaw after World War II, and in the style that it was before the war.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. I'm ashamed to say I didn't know that.
Yeah. I think one of the arguments is how unique is it? So if we take this building as an example, I don't know what the church here looked like, but presumably there were other examples of it.
Well, it looked a bit like the font at Erdesley. And, we're going to, and this is it. Yeah. Do we smash the font? Sorry to stop you again, I'll shut up in a minute maybe. But, do we smash the font at Erdesley if we're going to build something equally daring and fluent? Do we smash the great oak at Erdesley if we're going to plant a new one? Does only now matter, or does now not matter at all? Sorry, I've hit you with quite a lot there.
You have, I just think, sort of... We'll come to the now thing later, I think.
Okay.
That idea of the past and the future and now and so on. But I think if you take the idea of the black and white buildings, if you build a black and white building in the Midwest of America, it instantly smells fake.
Yeah.
It's just something not. It might be a really nice house, desirable to live in, but something just doesn't quite seem right. I think in some ways, buildings should be part of their kind of cultural environment and so on, and their actual environment. So people, for some reason, seem to only love, or a lot of people seem to only love old buildings, don't they? If you were to build modern houses in the Scandinavian style, in the middle of the countryside, now actually they might be
beautiful and well-appointed buildings.
And they might flow much better with their environment, but a lot of people would instantaneously go, they're not proper houses. They're not the real thing, they're ugly. They're not, We're just accustomed to an idea of what things should look
The
like.
shock of the new, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. So, is the building structurally sound? What's the point of knocking it down?
Are you talking about in the case of the Crooked House specifically here?
No,
or
I wasn't
in
at all.
Okay, go on.
I wasn't at all. But the Crooked House is a pretty singular example.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that became not just a national but an international news story. I mean, I know it was carried on several American. It was on CNN,
Yeah.
New York Times,
Yeah.
and it did seem to strike a chord, didn't it? But that was something to do with its uniqueness, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, it was culturally very important to the area of the Black Country. Slightly outside the Black Country, actually, isn't it?
Yeah,
South Staffordshire, but it's
yeah,
effectively
yeah.
the Black Country, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where it is.
Yeah.
But it's almost unique, actually. There is another slightly slanted pub somewhere in Tipton, isn't there?
The Tilted Barrel.
The Tilted
Yeah,
Barrel, yeah,
just down
that's it.
Prince's End, yeah. Been in there many a time.
But the outrage became something of a moral outrage, didn't it, about what the landowners had
Yes.
done without permission.
And it was also the speed with which it was done. It was the suddenness with which it was done, I think, that took everyone by surprise and increased their horror as well, wasn't it? It was the fact that it was beyond it.
Well, it was
seemed
clearly
beyond-
pre-planned.
Yeah,
It was clearly pre-planned.
yeah,
You know, they'd hired the digger
Yeah.
before, you know, to clear the site before the building had set on fire. And that's really, you know, I think to most minds is clearly completely unacceptable.
yeah. It seems off on a tangent, but have you ever seen the old Euston Station before they rebuilt it?
Not to I may have seen a picture of it, but not to my
Absolutely
memory.
stunning building. Now the new Euston Station, the 70s one, has, you know, it's got a remarkable ceiling, a remarkable roof, and was a piece of ultramodernism at the time. Is it just the shock of the new? Is it okay, like I say, if we build something where the Crooked House was, that's not a replica of the Crooked House, that's something daring and alarmingly new? For instance, going with your Scandinavian building in the countryside idea. And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Will anyone in 200 years care?
Yeah, I know. Well,
Is another factor, isn't
Yeah.
it? Should it be rebuilt is perhaps
Yeah.
the question. There has in the last couple of days, as we're speaking, been a preservation order on the bricks themselves,
that's right.
and they're being moved somewhere safe, aren't they? But whether that should and whether that will be rebuilt is really the question. It's expensive.
Because
Should the money be spent on that?
of course,
I'd like it to be.
the past must die for the future to be born, mustn't it? And, you know, if nothing ends, nothing gets started. And if we hadn't knocked down this thing on the hill, we wouldn't have this. And it's a pause for thought, isn't it?
Indeed.
And in the manner of a dream, we are transported to the top of the hill, where they re-erected parts of the interior of the church on a whim. I mean, when you get right up here, the money, the power, the hubris, perhaps, to think that this was yours to replace and to remove and to move is astonishing, isn't it?
Very much so. Very much so. We were touching, or I think trying to touch on that idea of the morality of what they did with the
Yeah.
Crooked House,
Yeah.
just to bring it to the most contemporary of all examples. And I think really what we're thinking about there is ultimately we know all buildings will cease to exist,
Yeah.
whether it's after human beings have done so
Yeah.
or not. All buildings will ultimately go.
Yeah.
Nothing lasts forever.
So the logical extension of that is nihilism, isn't it? Saying, don't matter then.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? So basically applying that to the Crooked House, we're saying does it matter? Because, you know, it had already subsided into mine. It had become a curio and a very interesting thing. But ultimately, you know, that building's life was going to be finite, perhaps more than some others of its age, already about 250 odd years old. But does that make it right for someone to have bought the land and without permission knocked it down? Obviously, set a fire in it, knock it down, and then have already bought the digger to kind of clear the site. So a very pre-planned act of destruction on a cultural artefact. And I think the answer to that is it's clearly very wrong. It's clearly an immoral act because it meant a lot to other people. Its lifespan had not come to its natural conclusion.
But the same could surely be said of this.
I don't know.
Because this
Probably,
is the
yes,
whim
I imagine so, yes.
This is the whim of an individual, and it's not like Horworthy Church, because although that was also rebuilt, I don't think that was of any particular architectural note. This indubitably was. So it's a bit crooked houseified, to throw the cat among the pigeons. And how far away, with time's lens, do we see these things for them to matter or not matter?
Well, it's the old thing now, isn't it? You say about all sorts of things in 100 years, who's going to care? And we're back to that idea you mentioned earlier about the now.
Yeah.
So should we be worried about the past? Should we be worried about what the future? But I think the preservation of the past is an important thing, and I'm not a person that wants to dwell and live in nostalgia. I'm really not. Right. And I do like modernity, and I do like modern buildings and modern architecture, and I don't have a problem with change, but I don't think you can simply say, oh, it would have happened anyway eventually in the end. That is nihilistic, and I think that is not the approach to take.
So where's the wiggle room then? Okay, between nihilism and the sentimental preservation of buildings, where's the, you know, we're searching for truth, you know, to be really bland about it, aren't we? For truth in the now, I suppose, in a time when things are happening that make us question that.
The wiggle room between sentimentality and
nihilism.
Nihilism.
Not where we were expecting to end up, folks, but hey.
No. I don't know. I think if, like I was saying earlier, if a building is structurally sound and usable and has meaning to people, then I think that sentimentality is important. I think you could apply that to hundreds of thousands of buildings up and down the country, if we just take this country as an example. So I don't know what the wiggle room is. I don't know when do you call it quits is the question, isn't it? When do you call it quits?
Yeah.
I think when it becomes unsafe.
Yeah.
I don't know about the expense argument, because if a building becomes unsafe but it still has meaning to people, should you then spend a fortune on restoring it? And that's just a very difficult argument.
Yeah, that's a separate argument. That's not an aesthetic argument, is it? That becomes a financial argument, or are the two interdependent? I do not know.
But I do not agree that the crooked house was an old knacker bound for the knacker's yard, and it was fine to do what they did.
No,
I don't think many people would agree with that point of view. I think it is abhorrent
it's
what they've done.
absolutely clear that nobody does agree with it.
Yeah, your cultural heritage is important, and yes, ultimately culture will end. But I do not think that is an excuse to not preserve it.
I think that's as good a closing sentence as anyone's going to get, because there is no answer to this argument, is it? Is there? It's an interminable question, isn't it? And it's a question which begs experience beyond our own, doesn't it? It begs an understanding of what posterity is going to do to what we've done. And other than by looking, and maybe that's the answer, other than by looking at the past, you know, learning from the past, learning from what's happened in the past, we've got no way of doing that, have we?
And now the weather.